Hello everyone, this is John Kountouris, and welcome to my show, Greek News on Demand. Today, I have a lot to talk to you about all the latest developments that have been going on in Greece, because these developments are really crucial and will determine basically Greece's financial fate within the coming months. So hold on tight, because I have a lot to share with you, and I think this is going to shed a lot of light on what's basically really going on there in Greece. My website, my news website, is GreekNewsOnDemand.com. That's one word, GreekNewsOnDemand.com. And there you can find a lot of interesting and crucial information about the Greek economic crisis. You can go to the site directly and basically type in key search words in its search engine. I recommend to go straight to Google and type in Greek News on Demand or GreekNewsOnDemand.com. And then after that, you can put in words like Greek economic crisis, or Greece and IMF, or the Greek debt, or any of these other buzzwords that have been used in the media. And basically, there will pop up a lot of interesting articles that we have in English for all of our English readers. We publish mostly in Greek, but we also publish a lot in English. And we do that because it's really important. I will be redesigning the site very soon, and it will be totally readable for both Greeks and for the English-speaking world, because we want to make this basically the number one voice about what's going on in Greece to the English-speaking world. Today, I'm going to focus on something really important that just took place between Greece and the IMF. And that has to do with the fact that WikiLeaks just released some really interesting conversations of two top IMF officials about what's going on in Greece. And what I'm going to do is refer first to WikiLeaks website, wikileaks.org, in an article that they published about this. Now, these leaks took place on the 19th of March this year. And immediately there was just a huge buzz over all of this because of the contents of these leaks, which we'll get into. But I'm going to refer to an article from wikileaks.org from April 2nd with the title, IMF Internal Meeting Predicts Greek Disaster, quote-unquote, Threatens to Leave Troika. So this is written by Julian Assange. And let me basically just read a few excerpts. Today, April 2nd, 2016, WikiLeaks publishes the records of a March 19th, 2016 teleconference between the two top IMF officials in charge of managing the Greek debt crisis. Paul Thompson, the head of IMF European Department, and Dalia Veculescu, the IMF mission chief for Greece. The IMF anticipates a possible default coinciding with the United Kingdom's referendum on whether it should leave the European banking unit. And they call that a Brexit. In other words, Britain and exit. This is going to be a disaster, remarks Veculescu in the meeting, whose contents, of course, were leaked. According to the international discussion, the IMF is planning to tell Germany that it will abandon the Troika, composed of the IMF, European Commission, and the European Central Bank, if the IMF and the Commission fail to reach an agreement on the Greek debt relief. So now I'm going to read basically what Thompson said in this conversation. We first quoted Veculescu. Now, here's what Thompson said. Thompson, look you, Mrs. Merkel, you face a question. You have to think about what is more costly to go ahead without the IMF. Would the Bundestag say the IMF is not on board? or to pick the debt relief that we think that Greece needs in order to keep us on board. Remaining in the Troika seems an increasingly hard sell internally for the IMF because non-European IMF creditor countries view the IMF's position on Greece as a violation of its policies elsewhere of not making loans to countries with unsustainable debts. Okay, so let's stop right there. So basically, the IMF, through these leaks, is telling Germany that it's going to basically leave the Troika for good if the IMF and the European Commission basically can't reach an agreement basically on Greece. So this is something, of course, that has been waging and going on between these two sides for a long time now. So we continue with the article. In August of last year, 2015, the IMF announced it would not participate in last year's 86 billion euro Greek bailout, which is covered by EU member states. IMF chief Christine Lagarde stated at the time that the IMF's future participation was contingent on Greece receiving, quote, significant debt relief, end quote, from creditors. Lagarde announced that a team would be sent to Greece, headed by Vaculescu. Thomas said internally that the threat of an imminent financial catastrophe is needed to force the other players into a, quote, decision point, end quote, for Germany on debt relief, and in the case of Greece, to accept the IMF's austerity, quote unquote, measures, including raising taxes and cutting Greek pensions and working conditions. However, the UK Brexit, quote unquote, referendum in late June of this year, 2016, will paralyze European decision making at the critical moment. So basically, just to comment on this last part, the IMF, hasn't not been participating in the recent bailout package that Greece received from last August. But what's really key amongst the conversations of Thompson and Vaculescu from the IMF is that basically Thompson tells Vaculescu that the threat of an imminent financial catastrophe is needed to force the other players into a decision point. So what is he saying here? What he's saying here is basically something that is nothing new. In other words, this is the way that the elite work. They work by contrived crises. They work by forged or contrived or made up wars in order to basically advance their agenda. This is nothing new. He's straight out saying here that they need to create a financial catastrophe in order to get all the players to basically come to a decision point. In other words, the European Central Bank, Germany, and the IMF, etc. About Greece, of course. So the issue that the IMF has with Germany right now is basically they want Germany to accept the IMF's austerity measures because the IMF right now is demanding at least 5.4 billion more in austerity measures, and then after that they want to demand another 1.8 billion in. They want to demand another 1.8 billion in measures, and these new measures, the IMF, this 1.8 billion, the IMF just basically conjured up saying that, in order for the Greeks basically to be viable, their situation to be viable and sustainable down the road, they're going to have to impose on them some more measures, which is completely insane and ridiculous. So again, these new measures have to do with raising more taxes for the Greeks across the board, and of course, cutting Greek pensions even more. And so continuing with this article, Thompson says, quote, "I am not going to accept a small package of measures. I am not," end quote. Quote, "What is going to bring it all to a decision? What is going to bring it all to a decision point?" Question. "In the past, there has been only one time when the decision has been made, and then that was when the Greeks were about to run out of money and seriously and to default. And possibly this is what is going to happen again. In this case, it drags on until July. And clearly the Europeans are not going to have any discussions for a month before the Brexits," end quote. Last year, Greek Finance Minister Evklidis Tsakalotos accused the IMF of imposing, quote, "draconian measures," end quote, including on pension reform. While Valculescu concedes in the meeting that, quote, "What is interesting, though, is that Greece did give in. They did give a little bit on both the income tax reform and on the tax credit and the supplementary pensions," end quote. So basically, continuing with this article, Thompson, in these leaked memos, in these leaked conversations that he had with the IMF chief in Greece, Dalia Valculescu, what he's saying is that the Greeks are not even getting close to coming around to accepting their views. But Valculescu argues that if the Greek government gets pressured enough, they would. But they don't have any incentive, and they know that the Commission is willing to compromise. So basically, that is the problem. That's the problem for them. So basically, at this point, in all these negotiations between Greece and its creditors, the European Commission is willing to negotiate a little bit, but the IMF is not. Continuing, Valculescu, quote, "We went into this negotiation with the wrong strategy," she says to Thompson, "because we negotiated with the Commission a minimal position and we cannot go further, whereas the Commission is just starting from this one and is willing to go much further. So that is a problem. We didn't negotiate with the Commission and then put to the Greeks something much worse. We put to the Greeks the minimum that we were willing to consider, and now the Greeks are saying that we are not negotiating." So basically what she is saying is that they basically didn't do business right from the beginning, both with Greece and with, of course, their European Commission. And that, of course, starting back in August of last year when Greece signed a third memorandum with the Troika. Continuing with this article, while the Commission insists on a primary government budget surplus, which is total tax minus all government expenditure excluding debt repayments, of 3.5%, the IMF thinks that this target should be set at 1.5% of GDP. As Thompson put it, quote, "If Greece comes around to give us 2.5% of GDP in tax hikes and pension wage benefits cuts, we should be fully behind them," end quote. Meaning that if the IMF would, in exchange for this fresh austerity package, support the reduction of the primary surplus target imposed upon them from the 3.5% that the European Commission insists on to 1.5%. So basically all the IMF is saying is that by 2018, if Greece can achieve a primary surplus of 1.5%, that would be great. And they would accept that. But the problem is that Greece would have had to have already agreed, meaning starting now, in April of 2016, to much more austerity measures. That's the trade-off here. Or else, basically, the goal for the primary surplus by 2018 would have to be basically a higher percentage. So basically, in a nutshell, WikiLeaks was able to pull off obtaining these conversations between Thompson and Velculescu, which clearly indicate, and here's the kicker, here's the point, that basically the IMF has in the works a plan by which to basically force Greece into bankruptcy, is really what they're getting at. Because in the whole, if you read basically all of these memos, all of these conversations between these two IMF leaders, you'll see basically that they're fed up with the situation, and that in order to basically just deal with Greece, they might force them into bankruptcy. And this is precisely the reason why Thompson was saying in these conversations that maybe they need to force basically a financial crisis in Greece in order to get all sides to agree. Which, of course, in retrospect sounds very sinister and, of course, conspiratorial. So, at this point, before I continue with the IMF, which is our main focus here today, I'd like to sum up the whole Greek financial situation from February of last year up until today, because throughout this whole period, the people that have been in power are those from the Communist Socialist Party, Syriza, and their leader, of course, who's also the Prime Minister of Greece, is a guy by the name of Alexis Tsipras. So basically, in February, on the 20th of February of 2015, in order for Greece basically not to shut down its banks for fear that people would go and rush and take out their deposits, they signed basically a new agreement with the Troika. But as things basically rolled down the road, they were not able to keep this agreement. So basically what the Greeks did was begin to negotiate this agreement again. They began to negotiate stuff that they already basically agreed on the 20th of February. Denying basically the process basically of the huge evaluation that has to take place basically by the Troika regarding Greece's whole financial situation. So basically since February up until about the beginning of June, this whole evaluation basically is not taking place. And this is very crucial in order for Greece's creditors to move forward in granting Greece more financial relief. So then what takes place basically in the beginning of July? The Greek government decides to shut down all the banks. They create a bank holiday. And of course, chaos ensues. And, basically this is just a huge, huge matter because this is basically unprecedented in Europe, where the government of a nation shuts down the banks for at least a week. I think in the case of Greece, it was like over 2 weeks. People have no access, basically, to any bank branch, and they can only basically go to the ATMs and pull out a small amount every day because they had imposed on them simultaneously something called capital controls. Now, I happen to be the very first Greek journalist to leak to the Greek press and to all of the Greek world the actual legislative instrument that the Greek government designed regarding the banking crisis, the bank holiday in Greece, because I happen to also be the legal translator who got the actual document in his hands first before anyone else, and I had to translate it from Greek into English for Greece's partners in Europe. Now, this is another huge, basically, thing that I like to hone in on. because it reveals a lot about what was going on at that time. But let's continue first with our timeline here. So, what happens then in middle of July? The Greeks vote against the memorandums. In other words, it was set to the Greek people to decide their fate as to whether they wanted to continue under the control of the Troika, the European Central Bank, the IMF, and the European Commission. So, the Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras calls for a referendum. This is all in the middle of July of last year, so it was a huge news, as you all may remember. This news went on for something like a week in the international press because it was just basically a huge moment in Greece's history and of course for all of Europe, because now you have people actually deciding in the most democratic of processes as to whether they want to basically continue to be under the control of these international bankers, under the control of these institutions from Europe, or not. And this, of course, was something where everyone at the time was saying, oh my goodness, this is like a perfect example of how democracy works. Look, the people of Greece are voting for their fate. Each person in Greece has the opportunity to vote as to whether, he wants his country to go in one direction or another. So what was the outcome? The Greek people unanimously decided that they did not want to continue under the control of the Troika, which basically meant that, Greece would basically be set free from the control of the Troika, but it also entailed that they would leave the euro and go back to the drachma. Of course, none of this ever happened, because what happened was basically the next day, the prime minister, instead of basically keeping to his word and honoring the people's vote, he decides to basically play it all off and act like nothing ever happened, like the people never voted. Because, of course, he did not want to anger the creditors from Europe, who wanted, of course, the Greek people to vote, to vote for them to be under the control, basically, of the Troika. So the Greek people voted no, but basically the lenders of Europe wanted them to vote yes in this instance for obvious reasons. So at this point, the Greek government completely betrays the Greek people. The Greek people are very angered at its decision. And at this point, Greece arrives basically on the verge of bankruptcy. And finally what the Greek government does is sign away the Greek people's fate one more time with a third memorandum package with the Troika with much more worse terms than what the two previous memorandum packages had imposed on the Greek people. So basically the Greek government decides to screw the Greek people even more. So basically at this point, the Greek government is forcing the other parties in the Greek parliament to go along with this. And they're forcing, of course, the Greek people to go along with this with, of course, their backs against the wall. And the Greek people were being told that if they did not agree, basically, to this third memorandum package, that basically Greece would have to exit the Eurozone, and as a result, there would be basically there would ensue an uncontrolled bankruptcy in all of Greece, and it would have major disasters for all of Greece. So what some analysts say is that at that time, the real major factor that was hiding behind basically the failures of the Greek government in this, in their dealings with the Troika was basically nothing more than the parallel currency, which basically is a huge issue, and we're going to get into that next. what happened was the then finance minister, Yanis Varoufakis, again, we're talking about the early July and on. At that point in Greece's negotiations with the Troika, he and some colleagues of him from some top university here in the United States, I'm trying to remember right now, what they did was create a parallel banking system for Greece that would entail basically a sort of an ethnic currency in the form of sort of the California IOUs. And if you remember the whole story about California IOUs, you'll understand basically, what I mean. So basically, this was something that Yanis Varoufakis, the Greek finance minister of that time, and Alexis Tsipras, the Greek prime minister, this is something that they both had decided on to do, which would basically, in a nutshell, save Greece from financial disaster, because they would create this parallel banking system. It would work basically on a new currency, and in the case basically where Greece would be forced to leave the Eurozone, and thus, of course, drop the euro as their currency, they would then basically have the option to switch over to this new system, which, according to the then Greek finance minister, would have been a great option by which to save Greece in this instance. So, finally, the Greek prime minister decides not to do it, and as a result, he's pressured basically to get rid of Yanis Varoufakis. And this is a huge issue, because Yanis Varoufakis apparently was forced to basically leave at this point, leave the Greek government entirely, to leave the finance ministry entirely. So as you all know, Yanis Varoufakis was a very flamboyant Greek finance minister. He became very popular. He gained rock star status. But the problem with him was that he was very liberal. He espouses Marxist ideologies, and he was also a major fan of George Soros and his banking policies. So basically, Yanis Varoufakis was one of these elitist economists who basically believes in a financial new world order, who believes in the full integration of Europe and all of this mumbo jumbo. He became an associate of George Soros back around 2011 and has had basically contacts with him, has been in high-level meetings with him, and things of that sort. But the paradoxical basically about this whole situation that transpired in about August of last year, where Alexis Tsipras is forced to basically get Yanis Varoufakis to resign, is that the person that was behind all this was George Soros himself, which seems odd because Yanis Varoufakis was always basically on the side of George Soros and what he basically does as a banker, and basically his policies, basically he agreed with his policies, financial policies for all the nations of Europe. But what happened was around early August of last year, there was a reporter from a certain well-known news site in Greece who was sitting in the Greek parliament during a session of parliament, and he basically was in the stands because, inside the Greek parliament, people can basically go sit in the stands that are above basically the whole area where the Greek members of parliament sit, and they can observe what's going on. So a reporter has a very powerful high-scope camera, and he was able to basically zoom in on Yanis Varoufakis' telephone screen, his cell phone screen, and basically capture a text message he was sending to a financial associate of his. And basically, Yanis Varoufakis is typing on the screen basically the following. He's telling his friend, in other words, the following: George Soros right now is pressuring Alexis Tsipras to get rid of me, is what he said on the screen. which was basically, just shocking because, when do you ever get an opportunity, basically as a journalist, to basically find out something as conspiratorial as this? This in itself, this of course was published everywhere. But this in itself, though, proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that, yes, there is a conspiracy basically that's going on against the Greek people, and George Soros is behind it. This also confirms how George Soros is behind the destruction of at least the financial destruction of nations around the world, on behalf, of course, the Rothschilds and all of his top associates. So here we have the Greek finance minister typing on his cell phone screen this text message where he's saying that he fears that George Soros is basically using the prime minister of Greece to get rid of him. And of course, eventually that's exactly what happened. And basically Yanis Varoufakis is forced to resign basically because, he did not want to basically go along with the whole agreement with the Troika. He basically wanted to do things on his own terms. He created a lot of friction. He had created this parallel banking system, as I said before, and so on and so forth. He wasn't really for leaving the Eurozone, but he was basically for creating a certain type of a currency that would basically sort of be a national currency like the drachma was, but it would also have its basis, though, it would be also pegged, though, to the euro. So let's continue quickly with our timeline before we get back to these leaks from WikiLeaks. So basically, Greece at this point and on up until now has not kept all the terms of the third memorandum that they signed in August of 2015. So several disastrous things take place in between this period. Greece basically sells off its largest banks for pennies on the share. They allow American banks like Chase and Bank of America and big type European banks to basically come into Greece and buy out Greece's biggest banks, but they do it for pennies basically on the dollar, for pennies on the share, which is a complete crime against the Greek people. And I've written about this. My colleagues in Greece have written about this. And this is something that has really damaged Greece and, of course, its economy. And this itself is a conspiracy against the Greek people. This should never have happened. The Greek government then basically sells off 14 of its major airports across Greece to a German company called Fraport, which is just completely insane. And this was all basically being talked about last year. And last year, the Prime Minister, Alexis Tsipras, said he would never do such a thing. But lo and behold, about a month ago, he does it. And this is just beyond, national treason. This is beyond, anything that is just on the level of treason. This is just insane to sell off Greece's 14 airports, which they did not need to do. And the terms that Greece received, too, with this German company was not even all that great either. They're not even going to get that money, basically, from this whole deal, either up front or basically in residual revenue. Greece also, during this time, sells off its biggest lottery company. During this whole time, Greece has not been able to finish the evaluation of its whole economic financial system, which again is a huge, huge role in order for Greece to get more financing from the Troika. The evaluation plays a huge role in all this. So Greece still is negotiating what they already agreed upon back in February 20th of 2015, like I had stated earlier. So Greece technically is still under the second memorandum, although they've signed a third memorandum, whose terms, of course, they've not been able to keep. And right now, what we're trying to do is, of course, expose the IMF and get rid of the IMF. It's said right now that Greece was the one that basically did the whole thing with the WikiLeaks. In other words, it was the Greek intelligence that basically got these leaks, and they leaked them to WikiLeaks, and in return, WikiLeaks basically publishes them on their website. So basically, this is a huge issue, which we're going to get back to in a little bit. But let's continue here. In the past several months, Greece is refusing basically a measure where the IMF wants them to pay another 5.4 billion in basically new austerity measures, pension cuts, salary cuts, taxes, etc. So because Greece has done this, the IMF has been angered, and now they want to impose on us another 3.5 billion, which is just insane. So basically, what needs to be understood here is that these new measures are being imposed by the IMF because the Troika from Europe does not agree with basically with alleviating the Greek debt, if not with the erasure of the Greek debt, which is something that the IMF deems necessary for the viability of this new program with Greece. So basically, the IMF now is being forced to accept an alternative plan, which is nothing more than the added financial encumbering of the Greek people with about 3.5 billion euros more in austerity measures. So basically, Greece is not really being helped out at all in this instance. On the one hand, there's a discussion about deleting the Greek debt, basically, or if not, alleviating it. And on the other hand, basically, if this doesn't happen, then the Greek people are going to be they're going to have imposed on them another 3.5 billion in measures on top of the initial 5.4 billion of the current program. Does this make sense to anyone? Obviously not. This all just sounds crazy to most people. And of course it is. And of course I'll tell you why, but a little bit later down the road. In either case, though, these measures, basically for Greece, are not going to work out. Greece's public debt is not viable. Neither is its private debt from the private sector. And while without the nominal, let's say, deleting of a portion, basically, of their debt, well, basically what I want to say is that without basically a deleting of a portion of both of these debts from the private and basically from the public sector, in effect, Greece basically does not have a future. And so at the same time, the Greek government is planning basically to submit 2 new bills in the Greek parliament to decide on all of this stuff, for which we don't even have the approval of the quartet, in other words, approval of the Troika, or of the international community, or of, Europe, or of the United States. While at the same time, we're basically admitting that, Greece has only basically that Greece, that the Greek government, and thus, of course, the Greek people, have basically very little left of the national sovereignty that they had before this whole program started. But basically, the truth is that Greece does not have authority over its own affairs at all, having lost entirely all of its national sovereignty due to the memorandums, because in the memorandum it basically states that if Greece agrees to the lending terms of the Troika, it has to forfeit all of its national sovereignty, and of course that's exactly what has taken place. So, in a nutshell, let's go back to the leaks. There was a huge discussion basically as to how these leaks took place in the beginning. Who was behind them? Was it the Greek government? Was it WikiLeaks? Was it the partners from Europe? Who was it? But the first thing that people basically have to realize about WikiLeaks is that it operates in a very, very safe and responsible manner. Meaning, WikiLeaks never discloses who sends them classified documents. If you go to WikiLeaks' website, basically you're going to find a section where any anonymous whistleblower, leaker, whatever you want to call them, can submit to them classified documents that are like bombshells about international news events, while at the same time remaining anonymous. The system that WikiLeaks has set up is basically based on a software that is designed to receive documents from anonymous people out there who want to expose, let's say, government corruption, things like that. But once WikiLeaks receives these documents, they ensure that the details of the sender are never, ever made known to them. So in other words, not even WikiLeaks knows who's sending them stuff. And WikiLeaks receives thousands of documents every day. But their system is set up where WikiLeaks, not even the people in WikiLeaks, know who is sending them what. So basically, when these whole leaks took place, the people in the Greek parliament, the Greek, parliament members of all the parties and the Greek media were saying things like, well, it was our Greek intelligence that was behind this, and they cooperated basically, with WikiLeaks. They gave this information to WikiLeaks, okay? And WikiLeaks took it in agreement with them and then published it. Well, that was just irresponsible for them to say that because, that's not how WikiLeaks works, number one. WikiLeaks does not make secret side agreements, basically, with other people out there, with governments, basically with intelligence services of other nations. That's not how they operate. They're a very sophisticated organization, and they basically, know what to leak and when to leak it. But again, they don't know who's sending them this stuff. At least that's what they tell us. That's what was recorded in a book written by the second in command in WikiLeaks. I'm trying to remember his name. He had written a book about this. You can Google it, novel on WikiLeaks, and it will say it all there. Of course there's rumors too that WikiLeaks works together with Anonymous and with Edward Snowden and all those type of things, which sounds fascinating. Great, okay. But basically, the whole story in Greece has been, not just Greece, but around the world, around the whole, that, it was the Greek intelligence service that was behind this. I personally have contacts with Greek intelligence in Greece, and I learn a lot of information from them. So basically, the story is that indeed it was the Greek intelligence services that were behind this, and they were the ones that sent to WikiLeaks these documents. So I can believe this story, especially from my contacts in Greek intelligence, to the degree that, hypothetically speaking, yes, the Greek intelligence could have went to WikiLeaks' website, submitted these documents to WikiLeaks, and then WikiLeaks simply takes the documents, not knowing from where they came from, and then, of course, publishes them. So yeah, that type of scenario very well could have happened. I'm not opposed to it. It sounds logical. And like I said, from my context and the Greek intelligence, that's what they said that basically happened. But they made it seem more like, Greek intelligence is cooperating with WikiLeaks. No, that's not how that happens. Now, if Greek intelligence is directly cooperating with WikiLeaks, that's another story. And that's something that's more interesting that I need to learn more about. But I don't have that information. Nonetheless, this whole story has made a huge buzz in the international press, and it's been going on for like a month now. And it's still basically causing headways in Greek press and in, of course, the international press. But what I wanted to add on this is that basically in February 27th of this year, something very strange happened which resembles this WikiLeaks scenario. A huge newspaper in Germany, I think it was Spiegel, they have leaked them a lot of basically the information that the IMF had on the Greek situation, and basically they publish it. And the story was that, the IMF got in contact with Spiegel and published them the secret information of the IMF on Greece's financial system. So basically, let me explain now basically how this works. Or rather, let me explain how this whole situation transpired. And then you can compare this situation with what happened, of course, in the 19th of March of this year with the WikiLeaks case. In a nutshell, the IMF basically admits that it leaks information to the press in order to basically create a buzz and in order to spur along this whole situation with Greece. So back in February of this year, the IMF was already admitting that they leak their own information to the press about what's basically about their dealings basically with the Greek financial situation. So take this now and compare it with the situation that occurred in March 19th of this year with the WikiLeaks case. Could this mean, in other words, could this mean that the IMF already back in February of this year was basically prefacing us, preparing us basically, to basically accept or basically, warn us basically, or foretell us that basically they would be the ones behind the WikiLeaks case in March too? In my opinion, I think so. Because the fact that they had already leaked some major information back in February of this year to this German paper, Spiegel, Der Spiegel, I believe it was, about Greece's financial situation, is enough for me to conclude that they too were behind these leaks basically back in March of this year, which was just about a month ago. Because they basically already admitted that they're behind these major leaks. They admitted this in February. So what would preclude us basically from, exclude us or preclude us from believing that they were behind these leaks too in basically March of this year? Now, how did I find this out? That they had sent this information to Der Spiegel back in February of this year. While I was just combing through some of my own articles that I had published on my blog, GreekNewsOnDemand.com, and I found it. So, what does this mean? Was the IMF behind these leaks in cooperation, basically, with WikiLeaks? To go to that conspiratorial degree, I don't know. Some people say, for example, that Julian Assange is nothing more than an agent of the New World Order, and he's just basically there to play his role and make us all think that he's some hero with what he's doing. What I can believe is the following scenario, that the IMF itself took these documents and leaked them basically, in other words, their own conversations between Valculescu and Thompson, and simply put, they submitted them to WikiLeaks. They made them anonymous, in other words, and they submitted them to WikiLeaks. Now, up until this point, WikiLeaks, of course, has taken full responsibility for these leaks. And they're not saying, of course, who gave them to them, because, again, WikiLeaks never, ever publishes their sources. So, it could very well be that it was the IMF itself back in March of this year, March 19th, that sent the conversations of Thompson and Valculescu to WikiLeaks. And then, of course, the day after, let's say, WikiLeaks finds them in their inbox, in their system, and is like, wow, here are some conversations between two high-level IMF people from, that are dealing with Greece. And, these sound very interesting, so I think we're going to publish them and make headlines about this. So, in my opinion, that's exactly, what happened. The Greek intelligence, I do not believe, was behind this. Some people in Greek intelligence tell me that they were. I don't believe this. And there's other reasons why. But what I do is basically I follow a paper trail. I follow basically the facts, even though basically I am connected with members of Greek government and Greek intelligence. So basically, the IMF, they basically played a real tricky game here. But they had already, like I said before, warned us back in February this year that they were behind these major type of leaks to the press about Greece. When the Greek, the head of Greek intelligence, Yanis Roubatis, was asked on March 19th if the Greek intelligence was behind this, all he said was this, that basically, the Greek intelligence does not act on its own. It doesn't just take documents and leak them. First of all, they have to go through a special type of district attorney who's tied in with their offices. And then this district attorney has to contact another district attorney that's tied in with the Greek Supreme Court. And basically, after that, they can go ahead and participate in these type of operations. So in other words, the Greek intelligence has to follow a certain type of legal framework before it does anything, and it has to communicate with the proper legal authorities in Greece. This is just the way it works. So in effect, this was the answer of the head of Greek intelligence, that the Greek intelligence doesn't do anything of its own, and it has to basically request permission, in effect, from the Greek Supreme Court in order to go ahead and participate in these type of activities. So in effect, what he was saying was that, what he said was that he denied all of this, in effect. That was his answer. That was his way of saying, no, we were not behind this. So this is really what the logical conclusion is for many out there, and of course for journalists like me who studies all this stuff intensely all day long, who communicates with Greek journalists and with Greek intelligence and with Greek, government, political figures. So basically, to sum this all up, the IMF is playing, in my opinion, a very heavy propaganda game. They're trying to basically force Greece to agree to new austerity measures, so basically, they can screw them even more. They want there to be a reduction, at least a reduction, if not a deletion of the Greek debt, which is something, of course, that the other side doesn't want. Germany doesn't want it, and the European Commission doesn't want it. But because they don't want it, then the IMF is saying they're forced into basically imposing more measures on Greece. So this all, of course, sounds illogical and sounds insane. And indeed it is. It makes clearly, of course, no sense. But all it is indicative of the way that these powers in Europe basically operate. And basically it shows how sinister they are. And, of course, if you read John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which was a New York Times bestseller, you'll see that the IMF is nothing more than a New World Order criminal organization that's used to basically go into poor countries to offer their leaders lending. And basically, if the leaders do not agree to it, then what ensues is nothing more than a takedown of their governments. In other words, the IMF cooperates basically with NATO and other type of military forces to go in and take over basically these countries, in cooperation, of course, with the CIA, to take over these countries because their leaders don't want to agree to basically the financial assistance of the IMF. But if these leaders do agree to the financial assistance of the IMF, then they are richly rewarded with Swiss bank accounts, and everything's hushed up and no one ever knows anything. This book, John Perkins' book, is very exciting, and it gives a lot of detail because he himself was an economic hitman for basically the IMF. He was an economist that went in on behalf of the IMF and basically negotiated these deals with these leaders. So he knows a lot, and he confirms basically the way that, of course, the IMF works. And, basically the IMF wants to load up these countries with all this money that these countries cannot basically handle, and then they get into debt, and then basically the IMF says, we don't want you to pay us back. That's okay. Don't worry about paying us back. But here's what we really want you to do. We really want you to hand over your natural resources. And this is really what this is all about. It's all about the money. It's about the gold, the oil, just like it was in Iraq and all these other countries that the United States and the powers of Europe have invaded and taken over in, previous decades. Anyway, this is John Kountouris signing out for Greek News On Demand. Again, my personal website is johnkountouris.com, JOHNKOUN, as in Nancy, TOURIS. There you can find more information about me. Thank you so much for listening. God bless.